During Christmas dinner at my son's house, we were savoring a precious family moment when abruptly I received a call from an unknown number. I answered, and a sharp voice cut through the warm silence. "You have to get back home immediately." When I demanded to know who was speaking, the person simply repeated with unnerving conviction, "Trust me, and go now," and then instantly disconnected the call. I rose from the dinner table, the unsettling urgency of the message overriding my manners. When I finally pulled up to the house, the sheer disbelief of what was unfolding was a physical shock. But before I continue with this story, please ensure you are subscribed to the channel and leave a comment telling me where in the world you are watching this video from. We genuinely love to see how far our stories reach. The day preceding that fateful Christmas day, the shrill ring of the phone sliced through my quiet afternoon like a razor blade. My son, Robert, had just called me, his voice unnaturally cold and utterly distant on the other end of the connection. "Mum, I've decided this year we are only going to be spending Christmas with our immediate, closest family. Without you." Every single word hit me with the dense, crushing weight of a large stone in my stomach. I remained utterly paralyzed in my worn leather armchair, the cozy fire crackling innocently at my back. The multicolored Christmas lights that twinkled so brightly through the window suddenly seemed to be actively mocking my raw loneliness. "But son, we have always—" What on earth happened? Did I do something wrong? "Nothing happened at all," he replied with chilling finality. "I just want a quiet, simple holiday. Victoria is completely on board with this decision." My chest tightened agonizingly. Victoria, my thoughtful daughter-in-law, who reliably saved the turkey wishbone for me every single year. The very woman who had called me just last month, asking for my late husband John's special stuffing recipe. When I finally hung up the phone, I stayed fixed in my chair for a long, quiet period, watching the Christmas lights outside blur into watery streaks from the sudden, unwelcome dampness in my eyes. The tall grandfather clock in the hallway slowly chimed the hour of 8 o'clock. Each resonant note seemed to painfully underscore the total finality in my son's voice. Through the window pane, I watched the large, heavy flakes of snow begin to fall in thick, swirling clumps. The houses of our neighbors across the street glowed with a warm, inviting yellow light. They were families gathered tightly around dining tables, sharing joyful stories and heartfelt laughter. The Smiths, right across the street, had their beautifully decorated Christmas tree visible through the main window, with neatly wrapped gifts already patiently waiting beneath the green branches. "What did I possibly do wrong, John?" I whispered to my own reflection, staring back from the cold glass. With a finger, I absently traced meaningless patterns over the condensation, as my mind compulsively replayed every single interaction I had shared with Robert over the past several months. Had I been too pushy about keeping our family traditions alive? Too unyielding in my desire to preserve John's memory through our long-held Christmas rituals? I watched every single snowflake dance in the amber glow of the streetlights, remembering how Robert, as a little boy, used to press his nose against that very window, counting the flakes and pleading with me to read him stories of great winter adventures. That sweet child now felt like a cold, utter stranger. The night stretched out agonizingly slowly. The fire finally extinguished itself completely, leaving behind only cold ash and the faint, lingering scent of burnt oak. I drifted toward the kitchen, mechanically warming a can of soup I knew, deep down, I wouldn't eat. As the microwave hummed its low, steady noise, my mind repeatedly cycled back to Robert's voice, desperately searching for any clues I might have somehow overlooked. I decided to check the old telephone directory. Perhaps I should call him back one last time, to apologize for anything I could have possibly done wrong. As I pulled the heavy, worn yellow pages out of the drawer, Another item slipped out with them. It was John's cherished old photo album. My hands began to tremble noticeably as I opened the cover. On the very first page was Robert, at 5 years old, his infectious, gap-toothed grin stretching from ear to ear, proudly holding a wooden toy airplane beneath our massive Christmas tree. I turned the page with deliberate care. There was John in our vintage kitchen, flour dusting his rich brown hair like fine snow, laughing heartily as he meticulously rolled out the dough for sugar cookies. The next photograph stopped my breath completely. The three of us together, John holding baby Robert tight against his broad chest, my younger self with an arm lovingly around both of them, all of us beaming into the camera. We seemed utterly invincible back then, as if there was simply nothing in the world that could ever separate us. I distinctly recalled that Christmas morning 15 years ago, Robert clattering down the stairs in his Superman pajamas. John was making his renowned cinnamon rolls, while I feigned surprise at his overwhelming excitement. When did that sense of wonder truly die? When did my beautiful boy morph into this cold, distant stranger? I flipped through more pages. Each subsequent photograph was a small, agonizing knife twisting deeper into my gut. There was John's last Christmas, 5 years ago, when the spreading cancer had already severely weakened his hands. But he still stubbornly insisted on wrapping every single gift himself. Robert had visited with less and less frequency that year, always inventing new excuses about work demands and obligations. "Hope, you have to keep the family together," John had whispered to me during his final week, his eyes clouded and unfocused from the morphine. "Promise me you won't ever let the distance grow between you and Robert." I had solemnly promised him. Had I failed that promise so completely? The microwave beeped with sharp insistence, but I barely heard it. Nothing mattered at all except these frozen moments in time where we had been truly whole. I closed the album gingerly, but I gently removed the photo of John laughing in our kitchen. I placed it carefully on my nightstand, ensuring I could see his warm smile the very first thing upon waking. As I undressed for the cold night, John's side of the bed seemed impossibly vast and echoing, just as it had been for 5 long, lonely years. But tonight, it felt even more hollow, as if the unexpected loss of Robert had somehow doubled the isolation that already permeated these silent rooms. The morning light struggled to filter through the half-closed curtains, casting long, weary grey shadows across my breakfast table. The newspaper lay folded neatly beside a bowl of rapidly cooling oatmeal, as I habitually scanned the obituaries, a routine that seemed to gain morbid relevance with each passing year. The electronic chime of the phone startlingly broke the quiet, causing my spoon to clatter against the ceramic bowl. After the confrontation the night before, any unexpected call felt instantly like a mounting threat. I checked the caller ID with noticeably trembling fingers, and my heart instantly accelerated upon seeing Robert's name. "Hello," I answered, my voice sounding far more cautious than I had intended. "Mum!" This time, I noticed a tiny flicker of genuine warmth creeping around the edges of that single, important word. "I truly want to apologize for the call last night. I was completely out of line and wrong." Relief flooded over me with such dizzying speed that I had to firmly grip the edge of the table to keep myself steady. "Son, I am so incredibly relieved you called. I was honestly worried I had done something terrible." "No, Mum. You did nothing wrong at all. I was just so stressed about work, and I took it out on the wrong person. Victoria actually reminded me how fundamentally important our family traditions are. We want you to come to Christmas dinner after all." "Of course I'll be there," I instantly replied, joy bubbling up inside me like effervescent champagne. "I'll prepare your father's famous turkey recipe, and I'll make the cranberry sauce." "That sounds absolutely perfect. Please bring everything you usually make," he said. and then there was a noticeable pause. Victoria is really excited, he continued. The kids have been asking incessantly for more stories from Grandma Hope. Something about his sudden, intense enthusiasm sounded strangely rushed, almost as if it had been rehearsed, like he was reading from a required script. Robert, what made you suddenly change your mind so fast? Yesterday you seemed so completely certain. I simply realized my mistake. That's all it was, he answered, his words stumbling over my question. I have to go now. Work calls. We'll see you on Christmas Day around noon. Wait, son. Can we just talk privately? I love you, Mum. See you soon. The call abruptly disconnected. I was left holding the phone, staring at it as though it might magically yield answers. For a brief moment, pure, unadulterated joy coursed through my veins. Christmas was saved, my family was restored, but in the heavy silence that followed, doubt began to filter in, cold and insidious, like air through a cracked window pane. Something in Robert's voice hadn't sounded quite right. The actual words were correct. The apology was appropriate. But the delivery felt hollow and mechanical, as if he were merely checking off items from a predetermined list. I walked over to the kitchen window, where last night's unexpected snowfall had transformed the backyard into a pristine, white paradise. The miller's children were already out there building a colossal snowman. Their innocent laughter floated across to me. Normal, regular families doing normal, regular things on a perfectly normal December morning. Perhaps I'm just overthinking this, I murmured to John's comforting memory as I continued my morning routine. Dishes in the sink, newspaper sorted for recycling, mug rinsed clean. That uncomfortable feeling, however, only grew stronger. Robert had actively avoided any attempt at a deeper conversation, fleeing the phone as if he genuinely feared awkward questions. Something he had said resonated chillingly in my memory. Victoria actually reminded me how fundamentally important our family traditions are. Since when did Victoria need to remind Robert of something so basic? And why mention her support so specifically? As if he needed her explicit permission to invite his own mother to Christmas. The next 3 days were a complete blur of fierce determination. I woke up on December 22nd with an unusual surge of energy I hadn't felt since John's death, happily humming Christmas carols while preparing my coffee. My notepad quickly filled up with detailed menu plans and extensive grocery lists, every item meticulously double-checked. Turkey, cranberry sauce, John's stuffing, I murmured aloud, tapping the pen purposefully on the table. Everything had to be absolutely perfect. This was my vital chance to prove that family traditions still deeply mattered, that some bonds couldn't be broken by grief or the passage of time. The butcher shop on Oak Street was teeming with a buzz of holiday shoppers. When my turn finally came, I leaned over the counter with the focused intensity of a woman firmly on a mission. I require your absolute best turkey, I informed the round-faced butcher. It's for a very special, important family gathering. The 22-pound turkey he proudly presented looked stunningly perfect and plump, like something featured in a magazine. I paid the full price without a single word of haggling, already vividly imagining the moment I would carry it into Robert's kitchen. December 23rd took me straight to the busy mall, where the massive crowds pulsed between the brightly lit, festive stores. At the toy store, I carefully selected a scale model airplane kit for Danny, a vintage Cessna that fondly reminded me of the wooden plane in that old photograph. For Sarah, I chose a comprehensive art set with a brilliant array of colored pencils, arranged like a perfect rainbow in a wooden box. That night, I gathered fragrant herbs from my sheltered winter garden for John's signature marinade. The actual recipe, written in his precise, careful handwriting, was propped up against the sugar bowl as I meticulously minced garlic and plucked fresh rosemary leaves. John, I truly hope I remember this correctly, I whispered to his photo on the windowsill. It must be perfect. The marinade came together as a thick, green, wonderfully fragrant paste. Garlic, rosemary, thyme, olive oil, and John's special secret ingredient, a touch of white wine. I gently massaged it, deep beneath the turkey's skin, with careful, loving fingers, feeling as though I was performing an ancient, powerful ritual of reconciliation. Christmas Eve morning arrived cold and grey, but my mood remained unexpectedly buoyant. I wrapped the children's gifts with military-level precision, flawlessly folding corners and tying ribbons into perfect, symmetrical bows. My best Christmas shirt was ironed and ready, with a liberal spray of cologne applied like emotional armor for the coming battle. As the evening approached, however, an undercurrent of deep-seated unease began to subtly infiltrate my thoughts. Robert still hadn't called to confirm the final details. What precise time was I expected to arrive? Should I even bother bringing a bottle of wine? Did the children have any food allergies that I had completely forgotten about? Frank Morris, my kind neighbour, appeared at my kitchen window as I was cleaning the marinade bowls. "Hope, any big plans for tomorrow?" he asked through the cold glass. "Christmas dinner with Robert and his family," I replied. "Maybe this is happening too fast. We're going to be a real family again." Something undeniably flickered in Frank's expression, but he merely nodded once. "That's truly wonderful news. You absolutely deserve happiness." After he left, I could not shake the lingering sensation that his casual question had carried a significant weight beyond mere neighbourly interest. Lying in bed on Christmas Eve, everything was meticulously prepared. The turkey rested calmly in the refrigerator. The wrapped gifts waited patiently near the front door. Everything, that is, except for my own rapidly accelerating heart, which seemed determined to find trouble where none was outwardly evident. Why hadn't Robert called to confirm? Why did Frank appear so worried? Why did this highly anticipated reunion feel less like a joyful gathering and more like a carefully staged performance? I stared at the ceiling until the first light of dawn, repeatedly telling myself that anticipation inevitably brings anxiety. Tomorrow would be perfect. It simply had to be. Christmas morning dawned beautifully clear and bright, the pristine snow glittering like countless diamonds scattered across the neighborhood. I dressed with ceremonial care, carefully adjusting my collar and smoothing down my naturally unruly hair. The turkey carrier felt surprisingly heavy as I transferred it to the car, alongside the bags of presents. I paused deliberately at the front door, my key suspended over the lock, and looked back into the house. Empty rooms stared back at me through the frost-covered windows, patiently awaiting my return. A sudden, cold feeling touched my back, but I quickly shook off the sensation and made my way to the car. Today was about reclaiming family. Today was about deep, necessary healing. The road surface leading to Robert's house crunched under my tires, the ice crystals sparkling intensely in the bright sunshine. Christmas lights perfectly delineated every window and door frame, creating a picture-perfect postcard scene that constricted my chest with a renewed sense of hope. I carefully maneuvered the turkey carrier and the heavy bags out of the car, the frigid air biting sharply at my cheeks as I approached the front door. Before I could even raise a hand to knock, the door swung open, revealing Victoria's immediate warm smile, with flour delicately dusting her red sweater like confectioner's sugar. "Hope, thank goodness you're here. Please come in before you completely freeze." The entire house smelled richly of cinnamon and fresh pine. Christmas music drifted softly from speakers hidden from view, as the coloured lights cast gentle, rainbow-like shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Danny appeared at my side as if by magic, enthusiastically hopping on the balls of his feet with barely contained excitement. "Grandma Hope, did you bring us presents? Can we open them right now?" "Mum said we have to be patient," Victoria replied, laughing easily, as she took the very heavy turkey carrier from my hands. This thing weighs a ton. What on earth did you do to it? The secret lies in John's marinade, I explained, carefully unwinding my scarf. 24 hours of garlic, rosemary, and patience. Martha and Joseph Harrison, Victoria's parents, greeted me with genuine warmth. Robert finally appeared last, straightening his tie with overly precise, almost too controlled movements. His smile reached his mouth, but it stopped abruptly somewhere before reaching his eyes. Thank you so much for coming, Mum. It truly means the world to us. Something in his tone prompted me to study his face more intently, but Danny grabbed my hand tightly and enthusiastically dragged me toward the dining room before I could fully analyze the unsettling sound of his voice. The dinner table gleamed brightly under the soft candlelight, the settings laid out with Victoria's finest china and napkins folded into crisp, perfect triangles. My turkey immediately took center stage, its golden brown skin glistening richly under the light of the chandelier. Would you like to carve it, Hope? Victoria asked, offering me the electric carving knife. You are the true artist here. I carved with strong, steady hands, each slice revealing meat so incredibly tender it practically fell right off the bone. The marinade had undeniably worked its magic, the herbs creating a fragrant, enticing crust that elicited murmurs of deep appreciation from everyone. Conversation flowed easily, like the wine, throughout the dinner. Joseph asked about my retirement projects. Martha enthusiastically praised every single dish. The children chattered animatedly about school and friends, their voices bright with the excitement of the holiday. Even Robert seemed to visibly relax, sharing stories about his work that sounded almost convincingly natural. But I could not help noticing the disturbing small details. How he would nervously check his watch whenever he thought no one was looking. How he flinched almost imperceptibly whenever a phone vibrated with a notification. His laughter hit all the correct notes, but something underlying it sounded profoundly hollow, like a distant echo in an otherwise empty room. Grandma, can we please open the gifts now? Sarah asked gently after dessert, her voice soft but filled with hope. Please, 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 Danny added, bouncing restlessly in his chair until Victoria placed a comforting, steadying hand on his shoulder. In the living room, wrapping paper soon spread out across the carpet like a colourful snowdrift. Danny's eyes widened instantly as he unwrapped the model airplane kit. A Cessna, just like at the air show. Can we build it together, please? Of course, I promised, feeling a warm, familiar heat spread through my chest. That is precisely what grandmas are for. Sarah hugged her new art set tightly, already planning her upcoming masterpieces. I'm going to draw our whole entire family, even great-grandpa John, so he can still be with us too. The room fell quiet for a noticeable moment, John's absence suddenly profoundly present among us, like an acknowledged, invisible guest. But it wasn't the sharp, stabbing pain I had carried for 5 years. It was something far gentler, as if he were smiling at all of us from some distant, peaceful place. He would have absolutely loved this, I said, my voice sounding a little hoarse and rougher than I intended. As the evening wore on into night, the lingering warmth of the meal enveloped us all like a comfortable, familiar blanket. Joseph and I began a lively discussion about baseball, while Martha quietly helped Victoria with the inevitable dishes. The children were happily playing on the floor with their new treasures, their bright laughter providing a joyful, rhythmic soundtrack to our adult conversation. I loosened my collar and leaned back deeply into the armchair, feeling more genuinely contented than I had in months. This, I realized, was precisely what Christmas was meant to be. Family gathered, traditions deeply honored, and love shared openly between generations. My phone vibrated against my chest. A soft, distinct hum felt through my jacket pocket. I ignored it at first, not wanting to shatter the perfect spell of this lovely evening, but it buzzed again immediately, insistent and persistent like a stubborn bee. "Excuse me, just one moment," I said to Joseph, who was engrossed in describing his grandson's particular baseball skill. The small powder room near the hallway offered a brief respite of privacy, its closed door muffling the happy sounds of family conversation. Unknown number glowed ominously on my phone screen. I almost instantly declined the call. Who, after all, calls on Christmas Eve except persistent telemarketers or obvious scammers? But when the ringing stopped and immediately began again, sheer irritation finally overtook caution. "Hello? Who is calling on Christmas? You need to go home immediately." The voice cut through any attempt at polite manners like a cold, sharp blade. It was a man, his voice urgent. Unknown. I blinked rapidly at my own reflection in the mirror, watching my expression shift from initial annoyance to mounting serious confusion. "Who is this? What are you possibly talking about?" "That really doesn't matter right now. Just go home." My hand instinctively squeezed the phone tightly. Behind the closed door, I could distinctly hear Danny explaining the components of his model airplane to his grandmother. Normal, familiar sounds of a cherished Christmas night that suddenly felt terrifyingly distant. "I don't understand anything you are saying. What exactly is happening?" "Trust me and go now." The call was abruptly cut off. I stood there staring intently at the phone as though it could somehow explain itself. My reflection in the mirror looked undeniably older somehow. The lines of worry around my eyes seemed far deeper. The stranger's voice carried an intense, genuine conviction that squeezed the breath painfully from my chest. What could possibly be wrong at my house? A fire? A robbery? Had I accidentally left something dangerous turned on? My mind raced wildly with possibilities as my heart rate soared. But this, I reminded myself, was Christmas dinner, my first true whole family gathering in 5 years. How could I possibly leave based only on a cryptic warning from a complete stranger? Through the door, I heard Robert laugh loudly at something Joseph said, the sound sharp and excessively bright. My reflection stared back with deeply worried eyes, the hallway Christmas lights casting red and green shadows across my face. The stranger's voice echoed with insistence in my memory. "Trust me and go now." Trust who? Why? What possible catastrophic emergency would require such extreme urgency that a stranger would track down my private number on Christmas Eve? Even as the questions violently multiplied, my body was already responding to primal, screaming alarm signals. My shoulders had tightened defensively, my breathing had become shallow and frantic. Some ancient, deeply buried part of my brain screamed that this call was absolutely not random. I pictured my quiet, empty house in the deep December darkness. What if someone was actually inside, crudely rifling through my belongings? What if it was flooding or burning down? "Mum, are you okay in there?" Robert's voice came through the door, sounding worried and perfectly timed. "Just a minute more," I replied, my voice somehow firmer than I felt inside. I took a single, deep, bracing breath, preparing myself for whatever came next. The stranger's intense urgency had completely infected me. I could no longer ignore it. I could not logically explain it. And I could not possibly pretend that Christmas dinner was more important than this overwhelming, growing certainty that something was profoundly wrong. When I finally opened the door, the cozy, warm family scene suddenly felt completely alien. Children's laughter, adults calmly conversing over coffee, the soft, steady glow of the lights that had felt so comforting just an hour ago. "Is everything okay, Mum?" Robert looked up instantly, something flashing behind his eyes that could have been worry or cold calculation. I absolutely need to go home, I said, more harshly than I intended. There is an emergency. Someone called. Something is wrong at the house. The entire room fell into immediate silence, broken only by Danny's model airplane making realistic flying sounds as he navigated it between the furniture. What kind of emergency is it? Victoria asked, a clean dish towel still clutched in her hands. My fingers fumbled nervously with the buttons of my coat, muscle memory failing completely under the mounting stress. I don't know any details yet. They just said I have to go home right away. Robert stood up immediately. His face was a picture of confused, perfect concern. Who called? Why wouldn't they clearly explain what was wrong? For a fraction of a second, I intensely studied my son's expression, searching for something I couldn't name. His stated concern seemed superficially genuine, but there was a deep-seated tension beneath it, a controlled anxiety that simply did not match his words. I have to leave. I bent down quickly to kiss the children goodbye. Their small faces looked up at me with innocent, bewildered perplexity. Thank you for a truly wonderful Christmas dinner. I sincerely apologize for having to leave like this. The cold December air hit my face like a sharp slap as I sprinted toward the car. In the rearview mirror, I could see the family grouped together at the doorway. Victoria was hugging herself tightly against the cold, Joseph was shaking his head slowly, and the children were pressing their little faces against the window. Robert stood slightly separated from the rest of the group, his silhouette dark against the warm light spilling out from inside. The suburban streets stretched out empty before me, the festive Christmas lights twinkling from house to house like distant, cold stars. The car radio was playing Silent Night, but nothing about this tense night felt peaceful or sacred. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned bone white. That mysterious voice repeated endlessly in my mind with every passing mile. Trust me, and go now. But trust who? And why? The speedometer crept well past the speed limit as empty intersections flashed past in a blur. I sped through a yellow light, then another, propelled by some primitive instinct that screamed danger. Could it be a simple robbery? Someone saw the house dark and empty on Christmas Eve, an easy target, while the owner celebrated with family. But how would a complete stranger get a hold of my phone number? How would they even know I wasn't at home? My mind circled back to Robert's behavior during dinner, the way he kept checking his watch, that forced, hollow laugh, the noticeable look of relief that had flashed across his face when I announced I was leaving. Was I wildly imagining connections that simply did not exist? Or had my son genuinely seemed almost anxious to see me go? I turned into my neighborhood street, noticing how few houses showed any sign of life. Christmas Eve in the quiet suburbs meant families gathered securely inside, curtains drawn against the cold. Perfect conditions, I thought darkly, for a crime. My house stood completely dark at the end of the street, exactly as I had left it. But something about it felt deeply wrong, a subtle, chilling wrongness that made my skin crawl before I could even identify what had changed. I parked my car behind Frank's oak tree instead of pulling into my own garage. Some deep instinct demanded discretion. The engine ticked softly as it cooled down, the only sound in the crisp, crystal-clear night air. The cold instantly bit my face as I cautiously stepped out of the car, every single one of my senses suddenly hyper-alert. The familiar street looked completely different through the terrifying lens of potential danger. Shadows were deeper, and common objects were transformed into potential hiding places or weapons. My house crouched dark and low against the starry sky, but something was amiss with its overall silhouette. A basement window, which should have reflected the distant streetlight, showed only impenetrable darkness. Broken glass glittered brightly in the snow below like scattered diamonds. Someone was inside. I fumbled for my phone with numb, clumsy fingers, dialing 911, while simultaneously crouching low behind Frank's fence. A flashlight beam methodically swept across my upstairs bedroom window. It was systematic and deliberate. Whoever was in there was clearly not in a state of panic. They were actively, methodically searching. 911. What is your emergency? There is someone currently inside my house, I whispered urgently, watching the light disappear and reappear in different windows. I can see them moving around inside with a flashlight. The dispatcher took my address and instructed me firmly to remain well away from the house until the responding officers arrived, estimating about 15 minutes. An eternity for a burglar to grab everything valuable and vanish into the night. I hung up the phone and opened my car's trunk. My hands were violently trembling as I blindly searched for forgotten tools. My fingers finally closed around cold metal. A tire iron left over from a tire change the previous spring. The heavy weight felt immediately solid and deeply reassuring. Whoever was aggressively violating my home would soon encounter far more resistance than they had ever imagined. I crept along the dark perimeter of the house, utilizing the dense Christmas decorations and snow-covered bushes as vital cover. The broken basement window told the whole story, jagged teeth of glass pointing menacingly inward, and snow scattered on the floor where the intruder had made their entry. The flashlight beam was moving systematically through my bedroom, pausing deliberately at the dresser where John's jewelry box rested, then moving to the closet where I kept important documents. This was not, I realized, random vandalism or desperation driven by drugs. Someone was searching for very specific items. My hands gripped the tire iron tightly as a powerful protective rage flooded my system. This was my home, my sacred sanctuary, my entire life with John that some petty criminal thought they could simply steal as if it meant absolutely nothing. I positioned myself deep in the shadows, right beside the broken window, straining my ears for any sounds from inside. Footsteps crunched in the space overhead, someone moving with a determined purpose through rooms that contained 40 years of priceless memories. The beam of light swept back and forth relentlessly like a frantic lighthouse, always searching. What exactly were they looking for? Cash, jewelry, electronics, or something far more specific and personal? The footsteps moved toward the basement stairs, descending directly toward the basement, right in my direction. My breath hitched in short, choppy gasps that instantly vaporized in the freezing air. Every single muscle in my body tensed as I pressed myself against the house's cold foundation, the tire iron raised and ready. Whoever emerged from that window would find themselves face to face with one very angry homeowner. The basement light flickered momentarily, then instantly went dark again. Cautious, intelligent, but not nearly intelligent enough to expect me waiting in the darkness. Papers rustled loudly inside, documents being examined and sorted. The sound squeezed my stomach with an overwhelming feeling of violation. Those were private papers, personal records, fragments of the cherished life John and I had painstakingly built together. How dare some stranger put their grubby hands on our private affairs? A chair loudly scraped across the basement floor. Drawers were opened and closed with soft, measured thumps. The methodical search continued, unhurried, despite the obvious risk of discovery. Whoever was inside felt completely safe, confident they had plenty of time to find precisely what they wanted. The flashlight beam drew rapidly closer to the broken window, casting long, eerie shadows across the snowy yard. I pressed myself even tighter to the brick siding, the tire iron trembling in my cold grip from adrenaline and the freezing temperature. A bag appeared first, dark canvas heavily stuffed with papers and small, distinct objects. Then a leg, cautiously testing the window frame before committing to climb out. I held my breath completely, every muscle poised for action. One more second, and I would have my answers about who thought they could rob Hope Davis on Christmas Eve. The second leg emerged from the window, quickly followed by a torso that I recognized with a sudden, nauseating clarity. Albert Rivers, my son's lifelong trusted friend, straightened up in my yard, clutching a bag overflowing with what appeared to be documents and valuables. Albert! I stepped out of the deep shadows, the tire iron raised high, my voice cutting the silence like a sharp, snapping whip. He instantly spun around, almost losing his balance completely on the slick, slippery ground. The bag fell from his shocked grasp, papers scattering wildly across the pristine snow like dark, incriminating confetti. His face instantly went pale as a ghost in the dim light cast by the neighboring houses. Hope. I honestly didn't want to do this. This was truly not my idea. Whose idea was it, then? I stepped closer, the heavy tire iron clutched in my hands. Documents were spread all around his feet. John's last will and testament, bank statements, stock certificates. Albert raised his hands defensively, backing himself against the wall with nowhere left to run. He said you would be at dinner for many hours. He promised you would never find out. Who said that? But even as I demanded the answer, the cold, brutal truth was already crystallizing hard in my chest, like fatal ice forming around my heart. Robert knew you would be at dinner. The words tumbled out of Albert in a frantic, desperate rush. He meticulously planned this entire Christmas gathering so that I could— The tire iron slipped right out of my fingers, suddenly limp and strengthless, striking the snow with a dull, heavy thud. My son sent you. Albert nodded miserably, hot tears streaming down his face in the freezing air. He urgently needed John's will, the Boeing stock certificates. He claimed you were planning to donate the millions to charity instead of leaving it to the family. Every single word landed like a sickening physical punch. I stumbled backward, staring down at the papers scattered in the cold snow. John's careful, distinctive handwriting on the official legal documents. Stock certificates that were worth more money than most people ever see in an entire lifetime. The precious savings of our whole existence reduced now to a target for common theft. The Christmas dinner. My voice came out as a strained, husky whisper. The apology, the heartfelt invitation, it was all a calculated sick fake. He's genuinely desperate, Hope. Albert crawled onto his knees, desperately trying to gather the scattered documents with uncontrollably trembling hands. Gambling debts, terrible investments. He owes people who absolutely do not forgive late payments. My legs felt suddenly weak and shaky as the total, sickening extent of the betrayal settled deep within me. Robert had looked me right in the eyes across that dining room table. He had graciously accepted my turkey and my gifts. He had allowed his own children to sit on my lap, all the while knowing his hired friend was violently violating my home. How much does he truly owe? Close to $200,000. Albert's voice was now barely audible. He found out about the Boeing stock in John's inheritance papers. He claimed it was family money anyway, that you would surely understand eventually. Family money? John's meticulously preserved and invested legacy over decades, reduced to a payment for gambling debt. The stocks he had purchased with his humble teacher's salary, saving penny by careful penny, trusting that his wife would use them wisely. I picked up one of the scattered certificates, John's name printed in his neat, careful script across the top. $3 million worth of Boeing stock, purchased over 30 years, when the company was in deep struggle and shares were cheap. His retirement nest egg, his financial security blanket against an uncertain future. He was planning to steal my husband's entire life savings to pay off his gambling debts. Albert nodded his head, no longer even trying to collect the papers. He claimed you would never miss it, that old people don't really need that much money anyway. The casual, dismissive cruelty of that statement, discarding 68 years of my life as utterly irrelevant, reducing John's sacred memory to a mere target for theft, caused something deep inside me to snap like thin ice on a frozen lake. My phone began to loudly ring again, the sound shrill and insistent in the cold winter silence. I looked at the screen. Robert calling. "He's probably wondering why you left dinner so early," Albert said miserably. "He's going to be absolutely furious that I got caught." I stared at my son's name on the screen, my thumb suspended over the answer button. Behind me, the sharp wail of police sirens howled in the distance, growing rapidly closer. In front of me, scattered across the pure white snow, lay the scattered remains of John's hard-won trust and my rapidly fading faith in family. The phone continued to ring, insistent like guilt, demanding like raw greed. The sirens wailed louder and closer, red and blue lights beginning to flash vividly through the bare tree branches like a cruel, twisted Christmas light display. They were upon Albert, who remained shrunken and huddled in the snow next to my scattered documents, his painful confessions still echoing in the freezing air. Two distinct police cars rounded the corner, their headlights sweeping across my yard and illuminating the broken window like critical evidence in a crime scene photograph. The officers emerged with practiced, efficient readiness, their hands resting near their belts, their eyes quickly assessing the entire situation. "Ma'am, are you the homeowner who placed the 911 call?" The female officer approached with quiet authority, her badge reflecting the Christmas lights of the neighboring houses. "Hope Davis. This is my home, and that man right there broke into it." I pointed to Albert, who raised his hands even higher, as if surrendering to an entire army instead of just two suburban police officers. The second officer knelt down beside Albert, beginning the all-too-familiar ritual of reading rights and applying handcuffs, while her partner focused her attention on me. "What exactly was stolen, Ms. Davis?" I picked up John's will from the wet snow, its edges darkened by the moisture, but the text still perfectly legible. He took financial documents, my late husband's will, Boeing stock certificates valued at over $2 million, and banking information. $2 million? The officer's eyebrows shot up instantly as she examined the damp papers. "That is absolutely grand larceny territory." Frank Morris emerged from his house, wearing a bathrobe tied over his pajamas, his slippers crunching softly in the snow as he approached us. His wrinkled face showed a mix of genuine relief and deep concern. "Frank, was that you who called me?" I asked, the final pieces of the puzzle fitting into place. "I saw someone with a flashlight moving around inside your house at about 9 o'clock, he said, nodding toward the officers. "I simply couldn't ignore that on Christmas Eve. I had to track down your number in the neighborhood directory. You just saved far more than just my belongings tonight." I squeezed his shoulder tightly, grateful for neighbors who still cared enough to get involved. The officer looked between us with a growing understanding. So this was definitely not a random break-in. Mr. Rivers here knew the house would be completely empty. "He is my son's friend," I said, the words tasting like bitter ash. "My son knew I would be at his house for Christmas dinner. He planned this entire thing." Albert, now fully handcuffed and seated in the back of the patrol car, looked out the window with the defeated expression of someone watching their entire future collapse. The officer, taking his formal statement, nodded gravely as the sordid details emerged. The gambling debts, the calculated planned theft, the brutal manipulation of family traditions. My phone rang again, the sound harsh and strident against the official, tense atmosphere of the crime scene. Robert on the screen was a stark, painful accusation. "Should I answer it?" I asked the officer. "Go ahead. It might be interesting for us to hear what he says." I accepted the call, putting it on speakerphone so both officers could clearly hear. "Hello, Robert." "Mum, where on earth are you? We are all getting so worried." His voice contained the exact, perfect mix of worry and confusion. "You have been gone for well over an hour." "I'm on my way back now, son. We urgently need to have a conversation." The silence stretched long and tense across the connection, and I could practically hear Robert's mind racing furiously to interpret my unfamiliar tone. "Are you truly all right? You sound so different." "Everything will become crystal clear very soon." I abruptly hung up before he could ask any more questions. The officers finished their necessary paperwork, while I slowly gathered the scattered documents. Each single piece of paper represented a precious fragment of John's legacy that had almost been brutally stolen by his own son. The Boeing stock certificates felt incredibly heavy in my hands, far heavier than their actual physical weight suggested. 30 years of John's careful investment, saved cent by cent from his teacher's meager salary. "We will need you to come in tomorrow to finalize your complete statement," the officer said, handing me her official card. "Mr. Rivers will be charged with breaking and entering, attempted grand larceny, and likely other charges once we sort everything out." Frank walked with me to the car as the two police cars drove slowly away. Albert's pale, defeated face was visible through the back window, like a terrible ghost of Christmas future. "Are you absolutely sure you're okay to drive back there right now?" Frank asked. "That is going to be a very difficult conversation." I looked back at my house one last time. The broken window, the disturbed, messy snow, the Christmas wreath on the front door, which suddenly seemed to mock the entire notion of peace on earth. Some conversations simply cannot wait, Frank. Some brutal truths must be spoken while they are still fresh. My car started reluctantly in the biting cold, the engine protesting loudly. As I backed out of the driveway, my headlights swept across the festive Christmas decorations at the door. Their cheerful red bow was a bitter, painful contrast to the family destruction I was about to unleash. But John's will was securely resting right beside me on the passenger seat, rescued from both robbery and betrayal. Whatever the outcome, his lasting legacy would be protected. When I arrived at Robert's house, the warm glow emanating from the windows and the twinkling lights created a perfect, flawless facade of family happiness. Through the front window, I could clearly see moving silhouettes in the living room. My son was nervously pacing back and forth near the Christmas tree, while Victoria gesticulated with obvious, deep concern. The recovered documents lay heavily on the passenger seat, like crucial evidence in a court case. John's will, slightly damp but perfectly legible. The stock certificates that bore his careful signature from decades past. I took them up carefully, each single paper now a powerful weapon in the battle for truth that I was about to fight. I did not bother to knock on the front door. This was still, technically, family, even if that sacred word had been irrevocably poisoned by raw greed and cruel betrayal. The front door opened instantly onto a scene of worried domesticity. Victoria was neatly folding dish towels near the kitchen entrance. Joseph was reading a magazine, while Martha worked on a crossword puzzle. The children were scattered across the rug with their new toys. They all looked up abruptly when I entered, and I watched as Robert's face transformed instantly from initial relief to profound confusion, and then to a rising sense of desperate alarm as he finally registered my expression. "Hope, thank God you're back." Victoria rushed toward me, with genuine, deep concern clearly etched on her features. What happened out there? You look absolutely terrible. Ask your husband what truly happened, Victoria. I placed the documents onto the coffee table with a deliberate, ritualistic ceremony, arranging them so everyone in the room could clearly see John's familiar handwriting on the will. The official paper with the Boeing letterhead on the certificates, the bank routing numbers on the financial statements. Robert stared down at the papers as if they were the cold, damning evidence for his own execution. Mum, I don't understand what any of this is about. These are John's will and the Boeing stock certificates that Albert just attempted to steal tonight. He is currently in police custody, charged with breaking and entering and attempted grand larceny. Joseph's magazine quietly slid from his hands. Stock certificates? What kind of stocks? John left me $2.3 million in Boeing stock. I watched every single face process this shocking piece of information. Surprise, confusion, and then a crushing comprehension. He bought them over 30 years by investing his teacher's salary when the company was in deep trouble. Robert found out I planned to donate the entire inheritance to veterans organizations and educational charities. Mum, that is our family inheritance. Robert's carefully constructed facade completely shattered, revealing the raw desperation that had been lurking underneath. You can't just give absolutely everything away to strangers. I can do exactly what I choose with my money, but you chose to steal it instead of discussing it with me. Victoria sank heavily onto the sofa, a hand clamped over her mouth as the final horrifying pieces clicked into place. The Christmas invitation, the sudden, strange reconciliation, all meticulously planned to give Robert a perfect alibi while his friend brutally robbed my house. I turned to look my son directly in the eye. You used Christmas. You used the innocent joy of your own children, your wife's genuine kindness. You used my profound grief for your father to cover up a felony robbery. Martha's crossword puzzle fell unnoticed to the floor, forgotten. Robert, please, tell us this is not the truth. But Robert could no longer deny anything. The damning evidence was clearly spread across the coffee table, and his friend's arrest had already eliminated any possible chance of covering up the conspiracy. You don't understand the immense pressure I've been under, the crippling debts, the kind of people I owe money to. How much is it? Joseph's voice held the grim authority of a man who had managed finances his entire life. $200,000. Robert's admission fell into the silent room like a thunderous bomb. Bad investments, a little gambling. It started small, but it grew so fast. So you decided to simply rob your mother, to use our children as mere accessories in a criminal scheme? Victoria's voice cracked completely. Danny looked up from his model airplane, sensing the crushing adult tensions that he could not possibly comprehend. Why is everyone suddenly shouting? Sarah clutched her new art supplies closer. The coloured pencils scattered across the rug like shattered rainbow fragments of the family dissolving around her. Your father made very, very bad decisions, I told the children softly. Then I looked back pointedly at Robert. Decisions that severely hurt the people who trusted him. I truly didn't want to hurt anyone. Robert was collapsing completely now. Years of careful, elaborate deception crumbling under the intense weight of the exposure. I just desperately needed time to fix things, to somehow pay back what I owed. By robbing your own mother on Christmas Eve? Lying to your wife, using your children as a sick alibi? Joseph stood up, his usual calm replaced by pure moral indignation. Victoria was sobbing uncontrollably now, not the soft tears of holiday sentiment, but the harsh, gut-wrenching sobs of someone watching her entire life violently disintegrate. How long have you been lying to me about the money, about your work, about absolutely everything? Martha gathered the confused children close to her, shielding them from the adult devastation unfolding in their Christmas celebration. I looked slowly around the shattered room. Victoria's bitter tears, the grandparents' deep shock, the children who could not possibly understand why their Christmas joy had turned into such utter chaos. My son huddled miserably in his chair, with his head buried in his hands. This family was utterly broken, efficiently carved apart by raw greed as cleanly as any blade could cut. The Boeing stock will go to veterans programs and education funds, precisely as John would have absolutely wanted. I collected the documents from the table, steeling myself to leave this horrific shipwreck. He believed in deeply helping others, in purposefully building something meaningful. You turned his entire legacy into a target for common theft. I stood to leave, pausing one final time at the doorway to look back at the destroyed Christmas scene. Victoria was still openly weeping. Joseph was comforting Martha. The children sat confused among their scattered toys, and Robert remained hunched in his chair with his head in his hands. Victoria, you and the children are always welcome in my home. You are completely innocent in this whole mess. I walked out into the cold December night, leaving behind the deceptive warm lights and the heartbreaking wreckage of what was once my family. The very next morning, the light filtered gently through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the table where John's rescued documents lay neatly arranged beside his photograph. Coffee was steaming fragrantly in my favorite mug, the one he had given me 20 years ago, with "World's Best Husband" printed in faded letters. As I reread the stock certificates with a new, somber perspective, I realized they represented far more than mere money. Each purchase date told a simple, powerful story. September 1995 saw, when Boeing was deeply struggling with layoffs and John saw an opportunity. March 2001, right after September 11th. December 2008, during the height of the financial crisis when others were selling in a panic, and he bought with quiet faith. My phone rang, interrupting the calm morning routine. Victoria's name on the caller ID squeezed my chest with a pang of worry. "Hope, I am so sorry." Her voice was rough and raw from all the crying, but also determined. "I truly never knew about Robert's plans, about any of this at all." "Victoria, none of this is your fault. You are a good woman who simply trusted the wrong man." "I am filing for divorce." The words came out in a rush. "The children do not deserve a criminal father, and I will not live with someone who could do what he did. You are welcome in my life always, you and the children." "Thank you. That means so much to me right now." After she hung up, I stared at John's photo, recalling our countless conversations about family, about values, about what truly mattered in life. He would have been utterly heartbroken by Robert's choices, but deeply proud that the devastating truth had finally emerged. A knock on the door interrupted my reflection. Frank stood on the porch, deep concern etched into his aged features. "How are you truly holding up, friend?" "It hurts badly, Frank, but now I am finally free of the lies." I invited him inside, grateful for his solid, unwavering friendship in the shocking aftermath of family destruction. "You absolutely did the right thing. The truth always matters, even when it is incredibly painful." I poured him a cup of coffee, and we conversed about practical, necessary matters, changing the locks, updating my security systems, and reviewing my will to ensure Robert could never again access the inheritance. "What exactly will you do with John's stocks?" he asked, carefully examining the certificates. "I will honor his memory. Veterans organizations, scholarships for deserving students, community programs, things that actively build people up instead of cruelly tearing them down." Frank nodded his head in slow approval. He would have truly liked that. After he left, I called my lawyer to immediately schedule a will review and contacted the bank to add extra security to my safe deposit box. John's legacy would be protected from all greed, used for the high purposes he would have wholeheartedly supported. The house felt distinctly different now, not crushingly lonely, but deeply peaceful. The deception was finally gone. The ugly pretense had been completely lifted. I was 68 years old with friends who deeply valued truth, a daughter-in-law who treasured integrity, and grandchildren who deserved far better role models. My phone vibrated with a text message from Victoria. "The kids want to know when they can come and visit Grandma Hope again." I smiled softly, replying, "Whenever they want. We are going to build brand new traditions." Looking at John's photograph on the mantelpiece, I felt his guiding presence affirming my decisions. The money he had saved would help veterans find necessary jobs, it would fund scholarships for teachers just like him, and it would support programs that actively strengthen families. "Your stocks will help people build far better lives," I told his picture, "exactly as you would have wished." Robert had ultimately chosen greed over family, cruel lies over genuine love, and calculated theft over trust. I chose honor over blood, truth over painful convenience, and integrity over false comfort. The morning sun streamed in through the windows, illuminating dust particles that danced like tiny golden prayers in the light. Outside, the fresh snow covered the neighborhood in an immaculate white, offering the powerful promise of new beginnings. The future stretched out before me, perhaps smaller than I had originally planned, but cleaner, more honest, and built upon solid foundation that would never again crumble under pressure. John's legacy was finally secure. The truth had undeniably vanquished the cruel deception. The real family, the kind built on love and deep respect rather than just blood and obligation, would absolutely continue. That, I knew, was more than enough. That was everything. Now, if you enjoyed this incredibly painful but ultimately redemptive story, please click on the next video that appears on your screen because it contains a story of betrayal and shocking twists like nothing you have ever witnessed before.